right, so tonight we are going to talk about chapter 26. And chapter 26 is soft tissue injuries. Soft tissue injuries are pretty much anything that involves the soft tissues. What are the soft tissues in your body? Muscle? Organs? Skin. Muscle, organs, skin. Okay, those are all soft tissues, and those are the ones that we're going to talk about in soft tissue injuries. The first thing that we need to be aware of is how our skin is designed. Our skin is divided into 3 layers, and those 3 layers, depending on how much is injured, that helps to define the depth of the injury. Okay? So when we look at our skin, if we just take a cross section of the skin here, and you all know that I can't draw, and that's okay, so no making fun of me, all right? Okay, so down here, down at the very, very bottom, this is under those 3 layers of skin, but this is where our muscle is at. So this is our muscle tissue. We're going to make our muscle tissue red, because I can. Okay, that's red muscle tissue. Just above the red muscle tissue, where the muscle connects to the skin layer, is a white layer. And that white layer, you've all seen, well, if you've ever butchered an animal before, you've seen this white layer, right? If you look at the muscle, there's a white layer on the outside of the good meat. And that good meat is covered by this white layer that's called fascia. So right here above the muscle, we have this layer called fascia. And obviously I can't draw white on a whiteboard, so I use this pretty little blue color.
Actually, sometimes it is blue.
Sometimes it can look blue, huh? Yeah. So then just above the fascia, we have the fatty layer. Okay? This fatty layer is called the subcutaneous layer, or this is subcutaneous tissue. Okay, and you can imagine, if you can imagine, there's all this subcutaneous fatty stuff almost all the way along. And depending, if you look at your skin and you have cottage cheese legs, which some of us do, some of us don't, I do, and you can see the little dimples in your skin, that's your fatty layer not being evenly distributed. Okay, so you get little dimples where your fatty layer sticks, your skin sticks more to your fascia than it does through the fatty layer. Does that make sense?
Welcome to what fat does.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gross. Sorry. Okay.
Having its way with all of us.
Coming up through, how did I run out of blue markers? I threw a bunch of them away. I think that's probably how. Okay, so coming up through our fatty layer, we have veins and arteries going up to the surface of the skin, right? Remind me when I'm done with class, I need to go to the office and get some blue. Okay. Okay, so we have veins and arteries going up to the surface of the skin. And as those veins and arteries go up to the surface of the skin, they kind of, remember what happens when we get cold? We were just talking about it a little bit ago. What happens when we get cold?
Vasoconstriction.
We have vasoconstriction. So instead of having a nice flushed surface up here, flushed means pink or red, right? Nice and warm. We get vasoconstriction. So all of the blood gets kind of pulled away. These vessels constrict down in here so that you don't lose body heat out of the surface of your skin. Okay, so your surface gets cold. We have hair follicles in here, and our hair follicles are designed, they start up a little higher, let's see, just above the subcutaneous layer. So the hair follicles are designed to come up, and they kind of come out of the skin surface. Not kind of. They're supposed to come out of the skin surface. Sometimes
The hair follicle doesn't.
the hair follicle doesn't. The hair comes out of the follicle at the skin surface.
Through a pore?
Pardon?
Through a pore?
Through a pore? No, not through a pore. Through.
Okay.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't say. That's fine. It comes out.
It does come out. Yeah. A pore tends to be a different type of opening because you leak.
Oh, yeah.
Something out
else
of
is
it.
connected to that.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Okay. So you leak sebum out of your sebaceous glands, and your sebaceous glands lead to the surface of your skin, and that's your pore. The oily fluid that comes out of it is sebum. Okay. Okay, so our hair follicle, at the bottom of our hair follicle, we have nerves. And those nerves are there because your hair follicle does more than just sit out there and look pretty. Some of us don't think they look pretty. It's too bad that Dusty isn't here, because I'd pick on him for shaving his arms.
He's senseless.
That's right. That's right. He's senseless. I actually was reading pretty recently that in World War II, when they got those Navajo wind talkers, the Army was recruiting them because they were doing such a good job of being aware all the time. And when they got recruited into the Army, the first thing that would go would be their hair. Because they'd lose all that long, beautiful hair, and it would get chopped off, and it would just stay short lengths. And the Navajo men who had scored so well on these physical prowess tests, you know, sensing people coming, waking up in the middle of the night if they needed to, etc., those Navajo men suddenly wouldn't score any better than the average Joe. Okay? So this happened to recruit team after recruit team, or recruit group after recruit group after recruit group. And finally they were like, what the heck, they do so well, and then when we get them here, they're horrible. So they allowed a group of them to keep their hair. And their hair acted as a sensor for them. So if they were allowed to keep their hair, they continued to score very, very well on these physical prowess, you know, skills type exams, not even exams, skills drills, or whatever you want to call them. So your hair is super, super important. It's also said that your hair will only grow as long as it needs to. Once it reaches its maximum sensor ability, it will stop growing. Okay? I actually don't have a difficult time believing that, because my hair won't grow. It's driving me bonkers. It's been this length for 2.5 or 3 years, and it will not grow. I haven't changed anything, still the same person, but my hair will not grow. So I do believe that when your hair reaches a certain length, whatever length is right for you, your hair will stop growing. Now, there is some science behind that too. When I read this about the Navajo recruits, Army recruits, I did a Google search on hair length, and there were a lot of scientific articles about your hair only grows to a certain length and then it's done. Let's go back.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Let's go back to this here, okay? So this is a little sensor. It also helps to regulate temperature. There's my marker. It also helps to regulate temperature. There are both sensory and motor nerves right here, because your sensory nerve, it kind of like comes along the side of your hair right here, back down into, and then it goes back up to your nervous system, right? But you also have a motor nerve, because your hair stands up, right? It stands up in response to stimuli. Like, I don't really have a lot of hair in almost anywhere. So it's kind of rare for me to be able to like feel my hair stand up on my arms, but every once in a while it's like, oh, wow, I really felt that, and I can.
I do it all the time. I sneeze like hell and I get goosebumps. Everything stands up.
Huh.
No.
That's interesting. I don't really have that problem. I kind of wish that I did.
When you get chilled, your hair stands up.
Yeah, my hair does, but there's not so much there that I can't really tell that it stands up.
So your problem is related. You can't grow the hair on your head very long. The hair on your arms doesn't want to stand up.
Yeah, and I really don't have any hair on my legs.
Whatever's right for you. She's dying.
She wishes that she had my lack of hair problem, because she doesn't. And I don't shave very often. I think the last time I shaved was August. And if you look at my legs, you can't even tell that I haven't shaved. Because the hair that I do have is super, super pale and very, very fine. So it doesn't show up at all. Anyway, so this is our subcutaneous layer. And then up here, we have kind of a divvy layer right here where our dermis and our epidermis meet. So this layer is called our dermis. And this layer is called the epidermis.
Epidermis. Epi meaning top. Epi meaning top. Or
Epi meaning
surface.
top. Yep. Okay. So, if we have a burn, for example, and we're talking about the type of burn we have, they used to call them first, second, and third degree burns. They no longer call them that. If it sloughs away the top layer of skin, it's called a superficial. Okay, so your sunburns, your red sunburns that don't leave blisters, those are called superficial burns. When you start to get down into this second layer, and the second layer of our skin is involved, then we have partial thickness burns. Okay, and as we get down below into the subcutaneous and below the subcutaneous layer, we have full thickness. Now these used to be first, second, and third degree burns, but they're not referred to that way anymore.
Can you get a sunburn so bad that it's a partial thickness burn?
Yes. When you get a sunburn to the point where it starts to blister, you're down into your dermis and you get partial thickness burn. So anytime you've ever had a sunburn that blisters, not just the ones that peel off, but the ones that get a blister on them, you're into this area, into partial thickness. Okay. All right.
You don't
So,
want to do that. You
pardon?
really don't want to do that.
no, you really don't want to do that.
My mom one time when she was very young fell asleep in the sun and she came away with sun poisoning.
Oh.
She was just nothing but burns like that.
Okay, so we also have in our various bodily openings, we also have mucous membranes. Okay, and those mucous membranes provide protection against the outside. We have mucous membranes in our mouth, we have them in our nose, we have them in the other openings that we have in our body. Okay. They are there to provide protection against bacterial invasion. But they're a little bit different than skin because they secrete some type of watery substance, mucus, something to help lubricate the area where they're at. Okay. Snot. Yeah.
Mucus.
Mucus, yep. All right. Okay, so what is the purpose of skin? Let's see.
Well, it's an external covering, and its purposes are form and shape, but also protection of everything that's within it. So it's a protective covering for our muscles.
Okay. So the purpose of the skin is to protect the body. What does it protect the body from?
Dirt, germs,
Okay, so we have pathogens. What else?
impact,
It can protect the body from impact. What else?
it provides senses. I can't say that that's protection, but
Okay. So
but in a
another,
way, maybe that is true, because if you feel something like hot that would hurt you, then those sensory things that would provide a form of protection, keep you away from
Okay.
the hazard.
so it provides some type of sensory input. Okay. What else does it do?
Provides for body temperature regulation.
Okay. So it provides for regulation. How does it? What's another way that it protects us? What's something else it protects us from? What about dehydration?
Okay, yeah.
What happens when the skin surface gets burned?
We lose fluids. That's
We
true.
lose fluids, right? So it protects us from dehydration. does it protect us from, or how does it help us regulate our body temperature?
Because when it gets cold, you get goosebumps and it like stops heat from coming out of your skin.
Okay, and how does it, what happens when we get hot?
You sweat.
You sweat. Okay, so in the regulation of body temperature, the skin and the skin surface causes vasoconstriction or vasodilation, depending on which direction that temperature needs to be regulated. Okay?
Now, vasodilation doesn't necessarily lead to sweating, does it?
Vasodilation does not necessarily lead to sweating.
Sweating is a separate function.
Yes.
And shivering is a muscle thing.
Yes.
So that's not necessarily skin.
No.
Okay.
Now, sweating in particular comes from the skin, but it's not the skin causing the sweating. Does that make sense? When you're hot,
Yeah, that's your, I'm thinking of the system. Mariah, help me here. Integumentary? No.
integumentary is the same as skin.
Okay.
Okay. So, when we talk about categories of injuries, or types of injuries, when it comes to the skin, and really to any bodily system, we have three types of injuries. We really have two, but they add burns in here because burns are specific to the skin. Okay? So, we have closed injuries. What are closed injuries?
Things that
It
don't
doesn't
break.
break the skin.
Yep, they don't break the skin surface. Okay, what are open injuries?
Things that penetrate the skin.
They do break the skin surface. Okay, and then we also categorize burns in here. Okay, and we just talked about how to classify a burn. It's going to be superficial, partial thickness, or full thickness. We just talked about that on our little kind of ugly skin diagram. Okay, wounds heal in a pretty natural process, and I think we talked a little bit about that process when we were discussing bleeding and how bleeding stops. Is that true, Chief?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
you weren't here for that, right, Mariah?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that and how we stop bleeding and how we start to heal. So what is the first thing that happens? We have the injury, the body starts to bleed. What's the first thing that the body does in response?
Vasoconstriction first.
We have vasoconstriction first. Okay? So we start with vasoconstriction. What does that mean? I know we've talked about this 16 million times, and we'll continue to talk about it until it's 17 million times. But what is vasoconstriction?
The blood vessels constrict.
The blood vessels constrict. So what happens?
Bleeding slows.
The bleeding slows. Why?
Because it doesn't have that normal amount of blood flow to get to it, because there's less blood going through the blood vessels.
There's less blood going through the blood vessels, and what else is a result of vasoconstriction?
Temperature lowers.
Temperature lowers, but something else more specifically. What happens in vasoconstriction? So we no longer have as much blood going there because we're redirecting it or we're getting smaller. But if up here is my injury and this is my vessel, okay, and I go through vasoconstriction and I go, whoop, what happens? What happens to my opening?
Well, it gets smaller.
The opening gets smaller. So we're not losing as much blood because our opening is smaller, right? So not only do we not have as much blood flowing out there, but the opening itself gets smaller. So even though I still have an opening here, it's not as big as it was, right? Okay, so the first thing that happens is vasoconstriction, okay? once we have vasoconstriction and we have the clotting, which we already talked about, how do we get clotting?
That's when the platelets all get clogged up around and you get coagulation.
Yes. So we have vasoconstriction, and then we have the process of coagulation, right? Okay, vasoconstriction, coagulation, and then as we move on, we're past the vasoconstriction, we're past the clotting, and we're starting to start the healing process. What happens?
I would imagine that the damaged cells from the injury start to die off, and you have white blood cells arrive to fight infection.
Okay.
And in a continuing process, your body starts regenerating new cells that take the place of the damaged ones, and therefore you start to heal up. And there's, in the case of a laceration, the tissues begin to stick together like they're supposed to. Too much insight to write quickly.
So, during our inflammation response, which is what happens after we have coagulation, I did have a paper cut on my thumb from a paper plate from last week, and the day after the cut, it was kind of warm and red, and it felt like maybe it might be a little pussy. And I thought, oh, I really should maybe, clean that with some alcohol or peroxide it or something. And I didn't. I just let it go. Well, look at my thumb. Can you tell? It looks almost completely healed, right? In fact, I had to look for it twice before I could figure out that it was still there. So the process that starts after the coagulation is inflammation. And inflammation is necessary in order for a wound to heal appropriately. So during inflammation, there are additional cells that move in to help clean things up. So our white blood cells move in to fight pathogens and to remove foreign bodies. What else? What other types of cells go in there to help?
You'll have an accumulation of lymph and other fluids.
Yeah, so lymphocytes, which are another type of white blood cells, lymphocytes also collect here. Because lymphocytes are particularly good at removing any type of bacteria. Once we have our clotting and we have our inflammation stage, we have a release of histamine. And it's a localized release of histamine, but that release of histamine causes almost a, sorry, my foot is scraping on the floor and it sounds like I'm farting. That release of histamine causes almost a reverse of this vasoconstriction. So that release of histamine in that localized area causes vasodilation. And you wind up getting this area kind of flooded with extra red blood cells to try and help rebuild things. Histamine also makes the capillaries a little more permeable, so it kind of makes things go through the capillary beds a little easier, and this histamine causes swelling. And that's why your injury site becomes red and it might feel warm to the touch just a day or a couple days after the injury. So inflammation itself, this process of inflammation right here, it leads to the removal of the bacteria and any foreign bodies that we need, that are there and that need to leave. Okay? Near an injured area, and in order for for it to heal, you have to have a large building block of extra cells. So after the inflammation stage and during the rebuilding stage, we wind up with this extra huge, you have to have extra cells dumped in there. So we have new cells are dumped near the injury site.
Where do they come from?
Your body decides that it needs new cells, so it starts building them in response to the injury. Does that make sense?
So they just arrive.
Well, it's not even really arriving. If your skin, we're talking about the skin right now, right? So if your skin suffers an insult or an injury, your skin is already always rebuilding its own cells. So that injury, that insult to the skin surface makes your body go, oh, this area is going to need more cells. We need to ramp up our production of cells in this area. Okay? So across the edges of the wound, your cells multiply and try to rebuild it really, really quickly. In most cases, unless it was a super, super clean cut and the edges were put back together immediately so they could heal together really fast, your skin doesn't return to its pre-injury form, right? You wind up with a scar.
What causes? What are they called? The ones that I get.
Keloid,
Yeah, what causes that?
overproduction of those cells.
What is that? Is it when you get a lumpy scar?
It's not just a lumpy scar, but it's like a scar that causes an increase in the level of the skin surface.
I
Yeah.
have one on
So-
my arm right here.
Like, instead of her scars being smooth, they
Okay.
get kind of,
Discolored too.
well,
That's,
it was a mole that was removed.
and it's growing back, but
But the surface of the skin itself is like raised up off of the arm.
So, my wife she doesn't scar. And I mean, she is, one day she got tangled up with the cat, and the cat tore her, and then when she was just ripped and bloody, and she was that way for a long time. You look at her arms now, you can't see any scars. And it was deep. I mean, JJ really tore her up.
There are some things like I had knee surgery about 2.5 years ago now, and coming out of that knee surgery, if you looked at my knee, it was a gorgeous scar. Like it looked, I mean, it was a scar still, but it looked like,
it was pretty.
yeah, it was very pretty. It looked like I had a scratch there instead of, an open knee surgery.
There was a line instead of railroad tracks.
Yeah. So it really just depends on how quickly the edges are put back together, how many times it's disturbed while it's healing, right? Because I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time talking. Every time we break the surface open again and we cause more injury there,
It causes more cells to come.
causes
back.
more cells to come and rebuild. Okay. People who have lightly pigmented skin, they might see a pink line of scar tissue, which signals the presence of collagen. And collagen is a structural protein that helps rebuild. Now, even though your skin surface might not look the same, the body is designed to rebuild it so that it functions as close to the same as possible, as close to normal as possible. So once we have these new cells that are dumped there and they're starting to, bind things together, we have collagen here, and those collagen and the new cells together are working to rebuild the surface that was damaged. The next thing is that we start getting new vessels, new blood vessels back into that area. So we have veins and arteries, and they start to go back in there because your body wants to take oxygen and nutrients and put that oxygen and nutrients back into the injured area. But the only way that it can do that is to restore blood flow. So blood flow comes, quite a ways down in the injury process. Okay. Do we have questions about the injury and healing process? I was going to say, we probably need to stop that. Did it stop itself?
No, still going.